Aloha, aloha, aloha. It is Sunday, November 24, 2013, and it is 5:14 a.m. in Hawaii Standard Time. Um, this video library is from a report I did on the success of the first strategic arms limitation talks, and this was written by me, a report. It was college term paper while at Iolani School, um, December 13, 1985, U.S. History, United States History class, and Mr. Jeff Hackler was my teacher. And his comment was, well, I didn't know what my term paper would be on, and I asked him for suggestions, and he mentioned the SALT, strategic arms limitation talks that he wanted. He was more interested. He wanted to learn about it, so I took that as an assignment because I didn't know what it was about either. And in sixth grade, I used my sister's paper to write my own paper on. My middle sister Tensha wrote a paper on um, oil industry, and um, I decided to use her paper to write my paper and project into the future. Um, and one of the things that when the U.S. got oil rights from wherever in the world, what they gave was salt. The first thing that they gave was salt, like Morton salt, iodized salt, and the second thing was Coca-Cola. Now it's different. But so I thought, oh, salt reminds me of sixth grade. Okay, I'll do it. So here was, I never turned in my paper as the stages of completion. He allowed us to do that to help us make a better paper. I just did it, and then whatever grade I got, I was the grade I got. And so here it is. His remark: Tony, what a tough assignment you gave yourself. No, he actually gave it to me. But you did a remarkable job of wading through the academic and intellectual sparring between the two superpowers as they defended their turf. Your writing is smooth, the organization of information is well done. I liked what you did, despite a few small red pen marks. Overall, A minus. And the guy sitting next to me only got a B, and he was really upset because Iolani is very competitive. Okay, and at the time that I went, the tuition was $3,000, and in 2009, or yeah, 9, it was 14,000, and it didn't matter if you were in kindergarten or a senior. It was the same rate. Punahou is different. I think it's graduated. For your kindergarten, it's lower pay, and then senior, it's higher pay. But I'm not sure. I only went 1 year to private school. Okay. And based on my grade and ranking, I think I was ranked 24 out of 341 students or something like that when I was a sophomore. So I got a half scholarship to go to Iolani, and my grandmother, my dad's mom, paid $1,000 because my parents didn't have enough money, and my parents scraped and saved 500 for the tuition. Books, I think we put it on the credit card because it's a college level, it's a college preparatory school, and their level of education is geared towards a sophomore in college. So once you graduate from Iolani, you can skip 1 or 2 grades, the freshman sophomore year in college, and you get out sooner. Um, so when I applied, I didn't go there because I wanted to. my very, very close friend, even to this day, she's a really good friend, um, Jocelyn Vo, needed my support because she was trying to get out of her lifestyle, her family, her mother. She's she was she needed support, and she she she's Vietnamese, and she's from the boat people era. I'm 44. She's actually 46. She didn't know. Her mom couldn't remember what year she was born. And when she came to America, came to Hawaii, her mom just put her into kindergarten, even though she was actually at second grade. She should have been at second grade. So when I met her, was in first grade, and and even though she didn't speak a word, you could tell she's smart, real smart. But I had the same IQ as she does. And Iolani, we had to. I, my work study job was the registrar's office, and we had to manually correct the IQ test. And the one we did was, I think the highest score was, I think 200 was the level, or 195 was. I can't remember. At that time there were about two different IQ tests, and I was only interested in my number and Jocelyn, and we had to correct it by hand using a key, a paper with the holes in it. You know, Brennan Morioka, also on a football scholarship, he and I both worked in the registrar's office. And we had to correct those. So at 16, we had our IQ test taken at Iolani, and we were always in competition with Punahou. What was Punahou's grades? What were their tests? And so academically, I think we were stronger than Punahou, but they were everyone wanted to go to Punahou. If you couldn't get into Punahou, then you went to Iolani. Iolani was mostly Asian and rich Asian, and then scholarship Asian. Me and myself and Jocelyn. And Jocelyn got a full scholarship, and I got a half scholarship. And anyway, it doesn't matter. That's kind of the past. So this is the first strategic arms limitation talks. Here we go. Nuclear arms, weapons with devastating results, are costly to both Russia and the United States. Moderation in the development of this weapon can be advantageous to both. The process of the first strategic arms limitation talks between Russia and the United States was necessary for an agreement on defensive nuclear weapons production. In the early stages of the nuclear arms production, the United States was ahead. They created the first bomb and established themselves as a supreme force. Okay, now to go back a bit, I did a paper. We had a project to do in Gifted and Talented English class as a freshman in high school, and I chose Hiroshima, the bombing of Hiroshima. And just at the end of, we had to, okay, it was multimedia. It was slides and speech, and you had to time it on this recorder thing, and so that every picture came up right when you're talking. This is before all of this technology, and um, mine was chosen as one of them to be shown to the parents. Mine was towards the end of the whole whatever showing that night, and just in time, I got information from a magazine, the latest magazine, about that bombing during World War II. And it was a theory that the U.S. did not have to bomb Hiroshima or Nagasaki, which is really strange. Nagasaki, they don't really show. So, anyways, sorry. That it was the U.S. flexing its muscles and showing off. They did not have to. So that's when I learned about, Little Boy and, Enola Gay and all that stuff. Okay. Okay, the Soviet Union was not far behind. They created, okay, in the early stages of the nuclear arms production, the United States was ahead. They created the first bomb and established themselves as a supreme force. The Soviet Union the Soviet Union was not far behind, however, and in 1949 exploded their first atomic bomb. Oh, sorry. In 1949, quote, in 1949 exploded their first atomic bomb, end quote. This marked the beginning of the nuclear arms race. When the nuclear arms race got to the point where both sides had the ability to produce a first strike attack, the United States brought up the idea of the strategic arms limitation talks. At that time, both countries had not reached parity. Quote, a delicate balance of anxiety, end quote. And, although each had the power to destroy the other, it was obvious that the United States could annihilate the Soviet Union more times than the Russians ever could. Okay, here's another side note. I did not like President Reagan. He had a terrible domestic policy about AIDS. And when it came about, when the disease was gaining attention in New York and San Francisco, by the time it came to Hawaii, we were all scared. And he had a good, I think he was good, well, I don't know, see, he's an actor, so I don't know if he was a puppet president also. He was just really good at memorizing his lines. And his own son hated him, and that's not a good sign. And Nancy, his wife, going to psychics, to find out about her husband, worried about whatever. And very strange, odd woman. I'm sorry, Mr. Chuck McElroy of Lucent Technologies. I know you loved Reagan, but what Reagan did was, I think, wrong. He broke Russia. We're talking in the 80s, right? So, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Tear down this wall. He used CNN to lie to Russia that we had Star Wars technology. We could shoot down we could plant our own ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, onto our satellites and shoot the Earth from any point and all that stuff. So when CNN was used to lie to Russia so that Russia would spend billions of dollars, millions of billions of dollars on a technology that did not exist at that time, it broke Russia. And what I get upset about is that Russia, if you think of what their assets are, they could sell their dirty bombs, And the boys of, no, that was Romania. Right, that was Romania, not Russia. Okay, so they're a socialist country, I understand. But to do that is really... Anyways, okay. So, right, what else? So CNN lied. At least to Russia. Interesting. Okay. Thus, whoever had a more powerful first strike ability would come out of the SALT talks in a superior position. Quote, the Soviet Union was in such an inferior position that it resisted SALT talks for the reason that agreements would freeze them in perpetual inferiority. End quote. Okay. When both countries reached a somewhat equality in power, SALT, Strategic Arms Limitation talks became possible. Both sides would then listen to each other. Okay, the idea behind the Strategic Arms Limitation talks is to, quote, freeze the nuclear power balance at the present level, end quote. Both the United States and the Soviet Union entered negotiations with this goal in mind. But how to come about it was a long and slow process. Each side was very wary of each other, neither one wanting to give in. The president during this time was Nixon. Okay. Nixon wanted to keep every possible option open for the United States during the SALT talks. Now, quote, whatever its bargaining value in Vienna, Nixon's stand-pat approach was designed to produce some benefits back in Washington, end quote. What Nixon was doing was stalling for time by waiting and watching the Soviets make a first move in negotiations. Quote, the administration had not fully formulated its overall nuclear strategy and thus was reluctant to enter into any binding agreement, end quote. You know, most politicians, I was taught by my boss, Marion Poirier at NAMI, National Alliance on Mental Illness. You know, the good politicians don't say yes, and they don't say no. No. That's what politics is about. Nixon gave his administration enough time to make a plan. Okay, next paragraph. The first confrontations between the Soviet Union and the United States over the SALT program involved stating each other's position without debating on any particular issue. Quote, once a week, each delegation visits the other's embassy, where the chief negotiators read formal but non-binding position papers, end quote, end quote. This achieved a beginning of negotiations and let each side get to know each other. During the second round of talks, the Americans and Russians, quote, abandoned the ice-breaking, handshaking efforts in the first session of the first session in Helsinki. Okay, end quote. Helsinki, Finland? Finland? Yes, I think so. Okay. The United States, I'm terrible with geography, sorry, and history. The United States wait and see approach was designed to draw out the Soviet Union's nego- suggestions, Soviet Union suggestions, and then Nixon would react to it. Many influential people were against this approach and urged the president to take the initiative by, quote, stating a proposal for mutual suspension and further deployment of anti-ballistic missile systems and multi-warhead rocket, MIRV, end quote. The technical effectiveness of the anti-ballistic missile systems were giving both sides some problems, even though the Americans' technology was more advanced than the Russians. Anti-ballistic missiles, otherwise known as ABMs, are weapons used against incoming Soviet missiles by attacking them while in the air. Thus, accuracy is needed and also complicated. I know, that's an awkward sentence. Okay, well, the technology is complicated. You know, you need laser beam, laser target. like a bullseye, right? Or a 3-point system, All right, so, anyways, okay. Quote, second, the Soviet Union may have decided not to compete in such an expensive undertaking where the U.S. had the technological lead, end quote. Embarking on such a costly program would be a waste of time and money with no guarantees that the Soviets would come out ahead of the Americans. Thirdly, quote, thirdly, an ABM deployment by one country would make another country assume as a worst case that it would work, end quote. Thus, the country without anti-ballistic missiles would become paranoid and start producing more offensive weapons to balance out the ones that would be destroyed. So, if Nixon initiated the SALT talks and brought up the idea of a mutual suspension on ABM systems, his terms would be given serious consideration. Okay, next paragraph. Many ideas came up during the SALT talks. One idea that was proposed to the Russians was, quote, come back, Tony. Nope, come back. The quote, the phased elimination of all land-based intercontinental ballistic missiles from both the Soviet Union and the United States, end quote. Oh, I need to blow my nose. Hold on. Talking, yeah, I know, yeah. Okay, now, makeup. Oh, where was I? Oh no. 11, 12. Okay, wait, sorry. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. No, it's now 5:30 in the morning. Hold on. I need a cigarette. Pardon. Okay. Pardon. Where'd it go? Oh. This is a really long report. Okay. This is a long report. Okay, now. Okay. Okay. You know. Okay. This proposal was given some consideration since it came right down to the heart of the problem. A suspension on MIRVs was introduced. The program of MIRVs, quote, multiple independently targeted re-entry vehicles, end quote, used missiles that had several warheads, quote, that could at least triple the number of nuclear weapons directed individually against targets in Russia, end quote. In other words, there is one large missile attached with several individual nuclear missiles that could be launched from the large missile against silos in Russia, for example. Okay. The MIRV issue was that the Pentagon's officials contended that, quote, MIRV warheads on America's land-based missile and Poseidon submarine-launched rocket would not change the strategic equation. These weapons, they said, were not powerful enough to knock out Russia's subterranean missile silos in the ground, and thus did not constitute a quote, first strike, end quote, threat, end quote. Okay, paragraph. This is supposed to be another paragraph. Sorry. Okay, next paragraph. Next. Okay, both Russia and the United States had MIRVs at that time, but America's technology, as before stated, was ahead of the Russians. The United States had been making a lot more MIRVs, a lot more, poor English, a lot more MIRVs than the Soviet Union with their advanced technology, so the Russians, quote, asserted that the Minutemen and Poseidon could become accurate enough to make up for their small size, end quote. Okay. The Soviets, to balance this off, had, quote, much bigger warheads on their SS-9 missiles, end quote, which could do a lot of damage whether accurate or not. Quote, in any case, administration officials argued that that it was the number of launchers, not warheads, that counted most in the strategic balance, and that these levels could be established by SALT, strategic arms limitation talks, end quote. Man, this is a long paper. Okay, the Americans expect a lot of cigarettes. Okay, the Americans expected the Soviets to come up with, quote, an agreement to restrict ABM networks, anti-ballistic missile networks, to the protection of command centers in Moscow and Washington. Yes, my husband is asleep. Okay. The Nixon administration expected the Russians to take this standpoint because it was advantageous to the Russians themselves. Quote, Russia had such a capital defense system in place, the United States did not, end quote. Obviously, President Nixon would fear such a proposal because, quote, a ban on defensive weapons only would have the United States intercontinental ballistic missiles unprotected against a growing Russian nuclear threat, end quote. Now, okay, Iran. When I was watching C-SPAN a lot and worrying about what was going on, okay, they're only supposed to have 5%. That's what C-SPAN said. 5%. And China and France, and another country, it might have been Russia, I don't know, I don't remember the first two, were giving them more uranium or plutonium or something, right? It comes from Nigeria. Anyway, so they're only supposed to have 5%. Now, when I went to Boston and lived there for about 10 months, before I became diagnosed with a mental health diagnosis, bipolar disorder. They weren't sure. Beth Israel wasn't, Deaconess Palmer 5, wasn't sure what I had. Jocelyn, I met her at work, at her job. Thinking Machines Corporation made the supercomputers, and they were the fastest, the most powerful in the world, more than a Cray. She told me certain countries were considered unfriendly, and you were not supposed to sell them technology for that reason. And supercomputers is one of them. Okay, that's what Jocelyn told me. And I actually stood in the center. I wasn't afraid. I stood in the center of Thinking Machines supercomputer, and you can feel vibrations. but has all you can see it actually in the movie Jurassic Park, the first one. They talk about what how the technology was able to advance so much that they could bring back dinosaurs. And in the book, I read the book by Michael Crichton, and in the book it mentions Cray, but Cray did not want to be in the movie, their machines, unless they were paid. But Thinking Machines said, "Go ahead, we'll give it to you free." Yeah, not give it, but for the movie, and we won't charge you to have it in the movie. Okay, so um, so that's a 1 degree of separation between me and that movie, and it was okay. Sorry, I'm gonna go off on a tangent. So sorry, I was about to. Um, okay, well, okay, wait. So the filming was on Kauai for it's my favorite island of the chain of 8 major islands in the state, and it had Hurricane Iniki, and when when Sun System computers came out, just on that computer alone, those computers, they made advancements in CGI, computer generated imaging. So they didn't need to, but they built T Rex and the plant eating. I'm sorry, I don't know dinosaurs. Plant eating dinosaur um, to scale with as much detail and realistically as possible, and then they scanned it right 360 and was able to manipulate the whole thing and make it look so real. The 2009, yeah, 2009 or 2010 mental health consumer conference was at Honolulu Community College, and back in the day when it was a high school for trade, to learn a trade, my dad went there for automotive mechanics. Oh, so I have to blow up the candle. So um, I'd never been to the campus before, and they had when you're walking through for you know the conference, my goodness, to sign in, it's behind the glass, T Rex, and it looks so real, freaked me out, and on the bottom of the sill, the bottom, not sill, it's the bottom of the glass case, the entrance, just with glass, and they had the cute little like caricature, cartoon figures of the dinosaur children series, these cute little ones. And when I looked down, they were all pointed towards me. I was like, oh my god. I think they just meant at that point when anyone stood, you look down and you see the cute little ones. Yeah, nuts. So, anyways, when I would stay up all night worrying and really hypomanic, I would drive to Paradise Park. And Paradise Park is no longer, we still call it Paradise Park, but there's a restaurant up there now. If you go around, there's no lights. Okay, if you go around the parking, uh, the road, there's this one spot. I swear to God, it was so spooky. You have your high beams on, and all you see is these trees, is total darkness. I could just imagine T-Rex just coming out of the bushes and scared me. I think I had the windows rolled up, but I imagined my friends in the car with me. Lori Meach, Debbie Rivers, and Gabby McCulkane, and part of the very big mental health consumer sandwich group. So now I'm making another Jurassic Park. Oh my god. I don't want to know. I don't want to see. So, okay. Oh, okay. Now, back to the report. But in order for an agreement to be reached, Nixon had to find a compromise somewhere. Oh, another thing about computers. There's this fringe group that think that we never landed on the moon. We did. But what we used when I was, for 2 years, all I drank was diet caffeine-free Coke, and watched a lot of science and history and um, technology shows. And what happened was we went to the moon just on a 386 computer. And when I worked at Architectural Design Models Incorporated, I was a senior secretary to the president of the company. It makes it sound so big, but it was a very small company. I did contracts and bookkeeping, ledger and stuff. So what happened was um, we had a 386 computer, and before Microsoft came around with their Microsoft Word and Word Perfect and Excel, it was Q&A, question and answers, right? Q&A and Lotus 1, 2, and 3. Well, and they bought out. There was a big takeover of Bill Gates of Lotus so that he could make Excel. And also QuickBooks was coming up, but QuickBooks was for home usage before it became QuickBooks Pro. Um, QuickBooks for companies, and my boss's wife, who trained me on how to do bookkeeping and how to balance a checkbook and all that stuff. She so smart. She said, "Look, Tony, we have QuickBooks," and I was looking at it. I'm like, "That's not what we need." I know it's just for checks, but that is meant for home. And this is a business. This isn't a home. It would have made it more complicated. I don't know. But I just knew it was not ready for what we were doing. My boss wanted to make 500,000 in net profits. Okay, I worked there 3 years or 3.5 years. So, okay, keep going. But in order for an agreement to be reached, Nixon had to find a compromise somewhere. The only idea that the United States would not accept was a, quote, weapon by weapon approach, which the U.S. feared that the Soviets would deprive the United States of an ABM system while improving their own, end quote. The U.S. would, by using this method, have to stop their production of ABMs and wait for the Russians to catch up, while they could make catch up, while they could make adjustments and corrections to perfect their ABMs. This idea was automatically ruled out because it put the United States in at an extreme disadvantage. So the SALT talks allowed both sides to express their ideas and plan their strategies. In the third round of talks options had formulated in the Nixon administration. Oh, okay, this reminds me of something else. In 1997, France was getting rid of everyone who wasn't French, either French blood or born and raised French. France is for Frenchmen to jobs. They're kicking everyone out. They're getting rid of non-nationals. And there's a word for that Paul Meyer, a good friend of mine, we both worked at NAMI, National Alliance on Mental Illness, and he has so much experience, and he was with NAMI like 19 years or so. So, I mean, a long time almost since its inception. So, so he was telling me all this stuff that was going on. I'm like, oh my goodness. He'd tell me in his funny voice. Like, oh, okay, I better. Well, as long as you know the word, I don't need to know it. But you want to avoid that, right? Because a culture is like a web, and well, anyway, not that one. It's nationalistic pride. It's like the one who stands alone loses the most. Okay, so in the third round, where'd I go? Where was I? Okay, in the third round of talks, options had formulated in the Nixon administration. The first option was a, quote, ban policed by on-site inspectors and a limit of one ABM deployment around the national capital. NCA. NCA. End quote. This, no, not NCAA. NCA. End quote. This proposal was backed up by another option in case the Soviets rejected this plan. Okay, the other option was, quote, a phasing down of land-based ICBMs, no limitation on MIRVs, and a limit of one ABM deployment around the national capital, end quote. Sorry, I need a... Oh, I need to smoke. This is like scary. Okay, scared myself. This is a long one. Oh my god. Okay, it's like at least 18 pages. And this is the only one I have. The original. Okay. Okay. If either proposal was met with any sign of rejection, rejection, then the U.S. administration would at least fight for, quote, a ban on all ABM deployments, end quote. When these ideas were presented to the Soviets, their reaction was predictable. Although they, quote, accepted the NCA ABM proposal of the first option, they promptly rejected the U.S. MIRV proposal, end quote. The Soviets saw the MIRV proposal as an outright advantage for the United States, who were ahead in MIRV technology. Quote, the Soviets felt that it would freeze them into a technological inferior position as well as impose on-site inspectors, end quote. The Soviets contrived a, quote, ban on MIRV production and deployment, but this proposal, which did not include a ban on MIRV testing, was unacceptable to the U.S., end quote. The second option the second option offered to the Soviets was met with immediate disapproval. The proposal dealt with the Soviets' land-based ICBMs, intercontinental missiles. Okay, think of the movie War Games. Remember, all that ICBMs. And the ones that were, dots that exploded, MIRVs. Love that movie, by the way. Okay, now, okay, is it start talking to me? What? The TV is on. I think the TV talks to me. I'm not the only one that feels that way. Ellen OY too. Okay, now, the second option offered to the Soviets was met with immediate disapproval. The proposal dealt with the Soviets' land-based ICBMs. Quote, the strongest part of the Soviet arsenal, unquote. If the Soviets agreed to this plan, they would have to move their missiles elsewhere. They would have to, like the United States, quote, move out to the sea where the United States enjoyed a significant advantage, end quote. Now, my boss at Lucent Technologies, I worked 5 years for that company. 3 years with the sales executive, Primo William Pimentel, and 2 years at the installation office by the airport. And Chuck McLeay was a former Navy submarine sailor. And what I knew before I knew about that was that it takes a certain type of personality. You have to take a personality test, not only an IQ test, but personality test, to handle 6 months or 9 months at sea in a tube with I don't know how many men. It takes a certain kind of sick sense of humor, maybe. But my sweetheart in elementary school, oh, he's so teddy bear with blue eyes. His name, um, um, Morta, Morta. What? I forgot his name. Manuel Orta. And I heard from his uncle Buzzy, a plumber, a master plumber, that helped my dad build their house. They're the ones that they have now. Um, told me that he passed the test, but it was a 4-year contract, and he refused. And interesting, and became a chef. Okay, KCC, Kakalani Community College, but I hadn't gone there yet for media arts web page design. 1 year. I don't have a college degree. 1 year, a year and a half of art and design at Pratt Institute in Brooklyn. A year of architecture, spring, summer, fall. Um, architecture at University of Hawaii at Manoa, and 1 year in 2002, um, $500 scholarship grant. Grants you don't pay back. Okay. um, at KCC, Iolani Community College. Yeah, that's where I learned, what is it? Freehand project was good. My Photoshop wasn't that good, and Flash was, my Flash project was horrible. Okay, talk about minimalist. That was minimalist. Okay, if the Soviets agreed to this, okay, the second option offered to the Soviets was met with immediate disapproval. The proposal dealt with the Soviets' land-based ICBMs. Oh, okay, I already read that. Not only would the Americans have the advantage there, but also the clause on the non-limitation on MIRVs, quote, would allow the United States to continue its planned MIRVing of American missile forces based in Europe. Whoa, right? Okay, end quote. Thus, the Soviet Union and the United States could only agree upon an ABM, anti-ballistic missile, NCA, national capital, whatever, right? One point at the capital, proposal. Although the Soviets rejected both of the offensive weapons proposals, the ABM NCA agreement made the SALT talks look optimistic. The fourth round of talks, I think it was Geneva, Switzerland, they were doing this. The fourth round of talks opened on a somber note, though. Year? What year was this? Well, okay. That was quote 32. Quote number 32. This is all in the 70s, I remember. Okay. Quote number 2. Quote number 32. Holler. When you write a college term paper, you have to, not plagiarize, and they're really big on plagiarism at Iolani, and I still have all the rules. Okay, real issue in arms talks, the U.S. News and World Report, 22nd March 1971, page 26. Okay, the fourth round of talks. Of talks open on a somber note, though. It had been reported by the, quote, Department of Defense on March 9th, 1971, that new construction of 8 of ICBMs had been detected in the Soviet Union, end quote. What Nixon and his administration were afraid of was, quote, a new type of ICBMs being produced by the Soviet Union, period. A report by, quote, Senator Henry Jackson of Washington said that the construction indicated a deployment of missiles bigger even than their massive SS-9 missile, end quote. This had detrimental effects on the SALT talks. Wait, hold on. And the galas are coming up through my nose. Sorry, that's disgusting. Galas in Hawaii, it means mucus. Okay, sorry. Disgusting, I know. Horrible. Hawaii is so funny. Okay, this had detrimental effects on the SALT talks. born and raised here. Me. Okay. People had been hoping for an early agreement, but the major, quote, stumbling block so far was the Russians' refusal to discuss an agreement that would limit both offensive and defensive nuclear weapons, end quote. The United States wanted a treaty that covered both types of missiles, but the Russians, by not agreeing to their offensive proposals, decided that, quote, a pact should be worked out covering defensive arms alone. Period. The U.S. rejects this position. End quote. As the administration saw it, there was no sense in covering just one or the other. Period. Quote, the belief in the growing Soviet capability to mount a preemptive nuclear attack, quote, end quote, has caused the United States to insist that, quote, an ABM accord must be linked to a simultaneous ICBM agreement, end quote. But the USSR believed that this was totally unacceptable. Quote, for one thing, Moscow and Washington have been unable to agree on a definition of what constitutes a strategic weapon. Strategic weapon. The Soviet Union wants to include all weapons capable of delivering nuclear warheads, a definition that would cover the approximately 500 American fighter bombers in Western Europe. End quote. Okay. Sorry, that's too loud. Okay. This question over what a strategic weapon really is led to further discussions from the United States. The U.S. pointed out that, quote, the Russians have thus far refused to negotiate a limitation on their missiles aimed at Western Europe, unquote. The Americans also claim that their airplane bombers, quote, were tactical, not strategic, end quote. The Russians claim that their missiles in Western Europe, quote, do not threaten the U.S., while the American fighter bombers do menace Russia, end quote. Quote, former government advisors Kistiakowsky, a Harvard professor, and Kath Jens, a professor at MIT, wrote against any linking of offensive missile limitations to any ABM agreement, end quote. They were afraid that Nixon may be pushing too hard for an agreement on both offensive and defensive missiles. To do so could well mean missing the greatest opportunity in years for real progress in arms control, end quote. That's quote 43, by the way. Nixon took the stand that if Russia does not agree to an offensive as well as defensive proposal, then there will be no agreement at all. Okay. Quote, Senator Muskie said, quote, by lumping negotiations of the strategic nuclear balance with tenuously related issues, the president makes SALT agreement much less likely. Different interests and issues are involved in these two areas. End quote. 44. The problem was that if Nixon didn't find a compromise soon, it would be to the risk of the nuclear arms race. So, quote, we must try to negotiate what is negotiable, end quote. Next paragraph. Pardon. It's on the radio. Okay. Okay. Calm down. Calm down. Coffee. Okay, I started smoking the year I turned 21. I was under a lot of stress, and I was drinking with my really good friend that she and I would go to a bar that served underage drinking. They weren't allowed to, but that's what all Pratt students went to. Now, my family has a history of being addicted to cigarettes. My dad started when he was 12, um, and my mom stopped smoking at 33, and the year she was pregnant with me. But anyway, my my husband started smoking I think at 15, but the year I turned 21 was when I started smoking, and I thought, and my good friend that still is a good friend, and she would give me hints along the way, like Tony, it takes half the years you've been smoking in order to get your lungs pink again. And the first stage is to get down to 11 cigarettes. So just give me all these clues. Shoot, I don't want to. Now, 1940s. Let's go back to like Mad Men, that TV show. You see them smoking cigarettes? Because studies were done in 1940 that proved that the combination of coffee and cigarettes increased productivity and accuracy in their employees by 15.15%. I'm on trazodone and risperdal, risperdal, and um, no longer on lithium, but Depakote. It makes it difficult for me to wake up. And because of the diagnosis I have and the medications I'm on, it's hard for me to be cognizant, aware, and alert. Awake, aware, and alert. It takes me a couple of hours in the morning. So I'm a better morning person to work. And then I get tired because of all, eat your meals and then kanak attack. We call it kanak attack in Hawaii. You eat so much you want to take a nap. So I think it's an early. I think cigarettes, because of my illness and what it does to me, in order to work, I need to wake up, and caffeine and cigarettes help. Not only did Dr. Douglas L. Smith come to a meeting, a monthly meeting of ours um, at the very big consumer mental health sandwich group, and say that consumers, we call ourselves consumers of mental health services, and I didn't know what that word was until I was introduced to it at a NAMI meeting. Consumer, what's that? Person who uses mental health services. PC, politically correct word. Um, so he said it lowers the medicated levels in your bloodstream, cigarettes, so you can walk and talk and think. So I think it's an income-related work expense. I mean, like Ray Sabula said, our training from Cornell, he came to Hawaii for 4 days and only one person. You stretch that rubber band so far, just so far, till it snaps, almost snaps. Can you stretch it? Yeah. So, are we? Again. Oh, oh, good grief. Wait, okay. So, where was I? Okay, so Muskie. Okay, the problem was that if Nixon didn't find a compromise soon, it would be risking an arms race. So we must try to negotiate what is negotiable. Okay, the fifth round, the five of negotiations began. Oh, it's in Helsinki. It was in. Oh, okay, in Helsinki. It was in Geneva. Okay, okay. The fifth round of negotiations began in Helsinki, Finland. The discussions were focused on the ABM Treaty and the details of it. Period. At this time, quote, China was beginning her leap to become a major military nuclear power, end quote. Now, I think it was 7 years ago on C-SPAN. I can't remember what, 2007. I was watching a lot of C-SPAN. 2007, 2008, 2007. So, um, the Clinton administration was up on the panel, and they were talking about what they went through with their administration. You know, they took 11 showers a day. I mean, there were so many issues and problems going on in the nation, and they were the cleanest administration ever. So, and whatever, they mentioned that China shot down their own satellite, and all the debris that NASA has to keep track of going around the Earth. Um, it's pretty amazing what NASA can do with 1/16th of a dollar. Okay, the Soviets were still not agreeing to any limit on offensive weapons since they were, quote, engaged in surpassing, if only slightly, the U.S. in the number of intercontinental ballistic missiles, end quote. The USSR and the United States discussed the possibility of, quote, deploying 100 or 150 ABMs for each side. A limit was agreed upon for the number of radars necessary for the missile installation also, end quote. The growing Chinese threat of nuclear power brought both sides to discuss the geographical location of the missile installations. The idea came up to, quote, not put any geographical limitations into the agreement since both sides claimed to need a thin shield for protection against possible Chinese missiles, end quote. The round 6 of negotiations began with talks of improving the Washington-Moscow hotline to, the red phone, to, quote, enable officials to find out quickly whether an unidentified missile had been fired accidentally by the other superpower or deliberately by China, end quote. This idea was presented because no agreement had been made yet about limiting offensive nuclear weapons. If both... What's your... Okay. Hold on. Oh, you poor team. Overworked. Okay, the idea came up to, quote, not put any geographical limitations into the agreement, since both sides claimed to need a thin shield for protection against possible Chinese missiles. Quote, end quote. Okay. Round 6. 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6. Okay, round 6 of negotiations began with talks of improving the Washington-Moscow hotline to enable... Right, I did that. Okay. This idea was presented because no agreement had been made yet about limiting offensive nuclear weapons. If both sides could not limit the number of offensive missiles, then they could at least inform each other in cases of emergency when a missile was launched by accident. This would prevent an all-out panic of one country thinking that the other was instigating a first strike. Okay, next paragraph. President Nixon, by this time, was getting impatient and restless. ADD? ADHD? I don't know. Okay, sorry. Don't want to put that on him. Okay. Once you get diagnosed with a mental health disorder, your credibility is shot. Sucks. Okay, quote, Nixon was aware that a strategic arms accord would enhance his prospects, end quote. He knew that if he could get an agreement on limiting offensive weapons, it would back up his presidential re-election in 72. Okay, 1972 or something. I don't know the number part. That's like yelling, that commercial. Okay. Nixon had initiated, quote, in 1971, a series of secret communications with the top Soviet leadership. This led to the first major breakthrough, end quote. Not much is known about the secret meetings. Almost everyone was kept in the dark while the president, Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, who's a cool dude, by the way, quote, met with Soviet ambassador to the United States, Anatoly Dobrynin, to discuss SALT, strategic arms limitation talks, end quote. Both sides made further discussions on an agreement to link an ABM proposal with an offensive weapon proposal. Um, okay, sorry, I'm going off on tangent thinking. Okay, quote, the point was made clear to Dobrynin that the United States would insist on a link between offensive and defensive weapons, end quote. This achieved a major breakthrough in the SALT talks. Okay, now what? Huh? Oh, next paragraph. Round 7 in the talks was the last one. The date. Okay, the date. Um, Professor, my teacher wrote date. Okay, hmm. Hmm. Okay, 55, quote 55. 55. Flat. Flat. Page 19. Flat. And that is the one. Alan Platt, the U.S. Senate and Strategic Arms Policy in Boulder, Colorado, was printed Westview Press, incorporated in 1978. Okay. 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 The talks focused on the agreement over offensive missiles. Quote, the final maneuverings within the U.S. government to achieve a unified position, the frantic last-minute negotiations between President Nixon and General Secretary Brezhnev were virtually unknown to the Congress and the American people. Now, the executive branch had completely dominated the negotiations. The agreement on the offensive weapons was a, quote, pact, P-A-C-T, of limited scope and duration, called the Interim Agreement, end quote. The reason why the agreement was brief was because the Soviet Union and the United States could only agree on a few basic points. The Soviets were against any agreement issuing a precise number of offensive missiles each side would have. They feared that the Americans would have an advantage because in order to find an amount agreeable to both sides, the Soviets would have to give specific information about their offensive weapons. Quote, SALT obliged them, they said, to stay within their limits, not to make it easier for the U.S. to maintain quality control on its intelligence, end quote. The Americans reacted to this lightly knowing that they had spy satellites to keep a watch on what the Soviets were doing. Thus, the Soviets took the position that the, quote, U.S. must rely on its own devices and its own data for counting weapons on both sides, end quote. Oh, a bit awkward, this part. Okay, in brief, the SALT talks were concluded in the 7th round of negotiations. Quote, the agreement, take a break. Okay, yeah, that's a good one. I'm listening to the radio. Okay, hold on. Okay, break. Woke up, had 4 hours sleep, woke up, freaked out about Iran and Israel and U.S. negotiation. What the heck is going on? Okay. Okay. Where am I? Oh, in brief. Okay. Quote, the agreement went into force on October 3rd, 1972. The duration of the ABM treaty was unlimited. End quote. Quote again. Through the numerous negotiations and meetings, they finally agreed on specific details. End quote. This proposal was introduced in the third round of talks. Quote, Hague, what? sorry. Go off on a tangent. Like, what? What am I saying? Hey, stop. Okay. Quote, 100 ABM launchers and 100 ABM interceptor missiles were allowed at launch sites. 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 Okay. Not sites. Okay, sites. Okay. 6 ABM radar complexes at capitals or 20 ABM radars at ICBM field. End quote. Also, both sides agreed on, quote, no development, testing, or deployment of ABM components which are sea-based, space-based, or mobile land-based, end quote. The rest of the treaty appeared as follows. Quote, no deployment of ABM components based on exotic physical principles and capable of substituting for ABM launching ABM interceptor missiles or ABM radars. No development, testing, of deployment of ABM interceptor missiles with more than one independently guided warhead. End quote. This agreement greatly pleased the president. He could show in the upcoming re-elections that he at least accomplished a pact. Page 11. Oh my God. On defensive weapons. The Russians, by the refusal for on-site inspections, agreed upon the clause in SALT I stating the, quote, prohibition of deliberate concealment measures and other forms of interference with national technical means of verification, including satellites. I kept typing out satellites wrong. This report is back when it was only typewriter, no computers. You have to handwrite and then, type up your, yeah. Okay, the interim agreement that had been discussed in the SIGH and SIETE seventh rounds were, quote, signed on May 26, 1972 with the ABM Treaty, end quote. Okay, hold on, come back, too far away. Come back, you're too far away. Both countries, come back, you're too far away. Okay. Both countries were restricted from constructing, quote, additional fixed launchers for ICBMs and no relocation of such launchers, end quote. Also, both sides were prohibited from changing, quote, the launchers for light ICBM, no, light ICBM, to launchers for heavy ICBMs, end quote. In this case, darn, cigarette went out. Okay, in this case, the U.S. was not on equal terms with the Soviet Union. Quote, the U.S. had no launchers for heavy ICBMs, while the heavy ICBMs, while the USSR had 308. Okay, end quote. The issue over of submarine-launched ballistic missiles, otherwise known as SLBMs, were somewhat resolved. Why am I thinking of Maine Tech? Maine Tech also had a person that used to, there's a former Navy submarine personnel, person, and he was telling me about what it's like to be in a tube full of men, how you have to, get along and stuff. It's a stressful environment. Okay, the issue over submarine-launched ballistic missiles, otherwise known as SLBMs, were somewhat resolved. Quote, the SLBM launchers were limited to the number operational and under construction at that time, I believe. End quote. The additional SLBM launchers were, quote, permitted as replacements for older ICBM launchers. As one new missile was introduced, an old one was being eliminated to keep the balance. The SALT talks enabled the Soviet Union and United States to discuss the issue of limiting the defensive as well as offensive nuclear weapons in a civilized atmosphere. The overall effects of the SALT talks were numerous. Many. An agreement on defensive ABM systems had been accomplished with a somewhat offensive agreement. This in itself is an achievement, considering both sides were extremely obstinate in their first proposals. The ABM treaty put, it's the end, it's 13 pages, okay, a damper on the fearsomely increasing nuclear arms race. Without the fear of a strong ABM defense, both sides didn't need to increase their number of offensive missiles. The SALT I talks established a footing for communications between the Soviets and the Americans on offensive systems, which could be discussed further in future negotiations. The SALT talks proved to Russia's and the United States allies that they were not interested in starting a nuclear war. If both of the superpowers had not entered into the talks, the trust between the countries' allies would have greatly depreciated. That's the end. Okay. Oh my God, how many minutes? Okay. 1 hour, 18 minutes, and 34 seconds. Yeah. Okay. So, all this stuff is happening in superpowers and all it's just, superpowered nations. I don't know. But we didn't start the fire. Okay. Okay. Any additions? So, CNN is now saying that Iran has 20% nuclear capability. I don't know if it's true or not, because the UN all agreed, and France and China are part of the UN, agreed only 5%. And since our technology can go through one power line, to go into their computers and shut it down, and Russia can use one person, one device, their cell phone, to kill their battery, or to take all the information out of that cell phone. Technology is wow. I feel really badly for those who who are not technologically um, savvy or understand the who instinctively feel fear because it's called future shock. When the future, when you're going along happily in your life, and then technology. One of the side effects is for mental health is future shock, and since the G8 summit, um, Japan agreed to do all the world's robots, and they showed, the arm one that makes cars. They're so advanced now with robots. That little guy, that 3 foot little guy that can dance and walk upstairs and walk. I think he can run now, but they can pick up an egg. An egg is so delicate. You know that's the test. What can it do with an egg? A soft egg. Not boiled. And I don't know if the rest of the world is ready. But if you want, what is that movie? Not Outlander. What is it called? Oh, that movie I have, Blade Runner. You know, the guy, the director who did who did Russell Crowe in 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 Are You Not Entertained? The Spaniard, Gladiator, right? Um, he did Blade Runner too. Also, that's in my movie library. So you know what Persia. I mean, they say Iran, but if you think of Suleiman the Great, the first one in Turkey, Armenia, all that stuff, Persia, Iran, and Iran and India, Asia, what they contributed to the world. That'll be the next talk, because Americans, they don't know their own history, and we forgot theirs, or we never learned theirs, and they didn't forget their culture, their history, and they know ours. So, United States is partly isolationist, keep the public, even with our weather, we only show United States, not the rest of the world. And they're Celsius and they're centigrade Celsius and we're Fahrenheit. That's another way of keeping the information. Whoever controls the information controls you. And well, what is it? What is it? I said this to my boss and she got really upset. We had this huge argument, but okay, was that lucid? Was it to? I told her I notice you withhold information as a form of control, and I had to apologize to her in written form too. But that was in the beginning when I first started working. I was nothing like Tess Baracchio, and it was very upsetting for them. Um, so, but I passed the test to get the job, and and so you know I don't think badly of Vicky Franco. Um, she did a lot and wasn't appreciated for what she did, and we were both happy when she took the buyout, and my position was being closed, so we both left, and I went to another job, and 9/11 happened, and the world changed. Our world, not the world. I mean, everyone else was worried about us. You notice when something happens over there, we don't worry about them. We only are selfish. We only worry about ourselves. And yeah, so whew, okay, eat breakfast, get some sleep. All right, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.